All right, welcome back to this edition of Queer Profits Podcast. I'm Diane Conklin, I'm your host, and I am excited today to have with me Emily Levy. And we are, just a quick reminder here at Queer Profits Podcast, we are about the three pillars. Don't forget, three pillars, right? Inclusion, community, and growth. And so I'm sure we are going to talk about all three of those things today. So, Emily, why don't you give us a little bit of background, kind of tell everybody who you are and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Diane, for having me on. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and really pleased that you're doing what you're doing in the world. So who am I? That's kind of a big question. Let's see, I live in California in the San Francisco Bay Area and have been an activist on a number of social issues for over 50 years. And also for the last 10 years or so have been running a business helping coaches and other service-based entrepreneurs, most of whom have online businesses, helping them with their technology and marketing. And I am moving away from that to move toward the work that is really more in my heart to do. That's been kind of a bread and butter business for me. And what I feel like I'm here on earth to do is help people make a bigger difference in the area of social justice. And so that's what I'm doing now in my work. And I also have, since the 2004 election, worked on election security issues, and that's sometimes been as a consultant and sometimes been as a volunteer. And I am also launching a new election protection effort aimed at securing the 2020 elections as much as possible across the nation. So I'd love to share more with you about that now. So those are my two big projects right now, helping people become more active in social justice in general, and also mobilizing the country to protect the elections next year.
Very cool. Yeah, so you and I met, it's been, gosh, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, I guess, maybe a little longer than that. And you were doing the marketing and the technology stuff. And so I knew you had the social justice stuff, and you've done all that. I'm obviously watching you on Facebook and staying connected that way, and through social media, knew that you were doing some of that, but didn't know until just a few minutes ago that you actually were moving away from the marketing and the tech stuff. So, but I think it's a great time, right? Especially with everything that we're about here at Queer Profits and what you're doing and what's going on in the world, especially inside of our community. I think it's a great time to talk about some of those things. So other than it being sort of that passion project and sort of that your purpose, if you will, and I always put that in quotes because that's different things for different people. But so what kind of convinced you to finally transition out of the online marketing stuff that you were doing and now into this?
So when I started my online marketing business, it was actually kind of by accident. I went to a business training to learn how to start a business doing consulting around social justice issues. And I was told by a couple of leaders who I really respect that I would never make money doing that. And they said the reason was that that the need for that kind of help was not urgent enough and that people wouldn't pay money for it. So what changed is that the need got a whole lot more urgent.
Wow. Yeah, on a variety of fronts, right? So
yes.
So what are you marketing then the social justice stuff that you're doing and growing that business differently than you did the marketing and other consulting business that you were doing?
Great question. So that business, the new one, is called Power to Make a Difference. And one of the things is that I started my digital marketing business on less than $100 out of like necessity when a bunch of stuff fell apart all at once in my life and I needed income, and I just kind of took an inventory of what skills and resources I had that I could possibly pull together and make a living at. And so this time, and it suffered always from having been totally undercapitalized at the beginning. And so this time I'm putting more of an investment into what I'm starting and getting a professional website instead of throwing something together myself and putting money into marketing and that sort of thing. And now I know a lot more about how to do that, having been in that field for a while.
Sure.
So so that's a big part of it. And then also, I think a lot of it has to do, honestly, with um, a lot of the difference in how I'm doing it has to do with my level of confidence of my expertise in this area. It's very high. I have no doubt, you know, I've been an activist for more than 50 years. I have the credentials to do this work. And, you know, there, when people say, well, who's your competition? I actually think for that work, my competition isn't so much other social justice consultants and trainers. It's like alcohol, TV, and the things people do to numb themselves out about the pain of what's going on in the world.
Right.
So, so because I have more confidence, I'm able to reach out to people um, who are bigger influencers to bring them in. So that's another difference. And then a third thing I would say that I'm doing differently is creating ways that I am building my audience by helping other people build theirs. So I've been doing an interview series on my Power to Make a Difference Facebook page of people who are involved in social justice in all different issues and all different ways. And that's both, it has the, it's to build my audience, it's to build their audience by having them have the exposure, and it's also to give the audience of those interviews a variety of pictures of how people work for change. And so I not only talk, what's unusual about this interview series is that I not only talk about what the causes are that people are working for, but what's it like day to day to be doing the work that they do, because I think that's a picture that people are really lacking. I think people who are not involved in social justice work tend to think it's standing out on the street corner with a sign or calling Congress, and there's so much more to it, and what it looks like on a day-to-day basis to do that work is really unfamiliar to most people. So I want to really demystify that.
Very cool. So let's talk about the social justice piece from the perspective of, the queer community. So, talk a little bit about what the issues are and the biggest issues that you're seeing right now, and the biggest things that, are kind of at the forefront. Obviously, we know a few of them, but that really need our attention and potentially our money and our time and that sort of thing.
So I think the overall thing is the intended rollback of the gains that we have been fighting for generations, and that that's on all kinds of different fronts, and it happens in the courts, and it happens in legislatures, and from the administration nationally. So you know I I think there's I think that there's really a danger that this rollback is going to mean that those of us who have taken advantage of the gains that we've made as a queer community and have been really out and have gotten married or have like put on our Facebook profile or other social media profiles who we're in a relationship with, that we're in some danger of there being a backlash that targets us for being so public. So I have a fear about that. I think so. I want to take this a little bit different direction. When I was in my 20s, I did a lot of work to stop nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And my grandfather, who was very active in the Jewish community in Philadelphia, where he lived and had been for a long time, said he really didn't understand why I was doing this activism that wasn't just for Jews. And I thought about it, and what I said to him is, in your lifetime, that's who's been targeted. Jews were so much of a target during and after World War II, or before, during, and after World War II, that's who he felt like his people were that needed protection. And that for me, in the 80s, I felt like all of humanity was my people who needed protection. And so that it came from the same place of like, we need to protect us, but that because of kind of who was targeted, us was defined differently.
Hmm.
Does that make, is that
Yeah,
clear
I
what I'm
love that.
saying?
So
And
who's the us now? Is the us
so the
LGBT
us is the
or?
whole world right now
Okay,
to
good.
me. You know, and I think that we can work on the problems that the whole world is having within communities that we're more comfortable in, and that's fine. And to me, it doesn't make any sense to say, as a queer community, we're only going to work on queer issues.
Yeah, because it's sort of like the adage of you take yourself everywhere you go. We're a piece of and a part of the bigger picture in the world, right? So
Yes,
as things change and all of that, and certainly to your point about being pulled backwards, at least here in the states, and with some of the gains that we've made, as I shared with you earlier. I've talked to some of our trans brothers and sisters recently, and certainly they're feeling that. I mean, there's so many of
absolutely.
us as the L and the G and the B of the LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're feeling it, but I think they certainly are at a much bigger level with all this stupid bathroom stuff. And certainly from a leadership of our country perspective, there have been specific things related to them that are changing with the military and all sorts of things. So
Absolutely.
um, so, what are the things that we can do, both as individuals and certainly as business leaders, to make a difference? Whatever the topic is, right? From a social justice perspective, whether it's inside of the queer community or, a Jewish community, or whether it's because, a black issue or whatever. What are the things that we can do individually that are going to make a difference? Because I think one of the things that happens is people say, well, what can I do? Right? I'm
Exactly.
just me.
Exactly. And that's why I have my online program that's called From Good Intentions to Powerful Action for Social Justice, How to Make a Difference. And it's specifically for that thing, because people say, I want to do something and I don't know what I could do that will matter. And the first step, I think, in figuring that out for yourself as an individual is to really look at, what do you mean by what will matter? What counts as mattering to you? Because I think sometimes when we say that, it's sort of, um, if you dig down underneath, what can come up is, um, what can I do that will fix all the problems? And the answer to that is, by yourself, probably nothing. You know, that you may be able to make a huge impact in one problem, or be part of making, with many other people, be part of making a huge impact on a bigger problem. So just like anything, the more you narrow down the scope of what you're doing, the bigger impact you can have on it. So you could think of it as parallel to niching in your business, right? That if you try to help everybody on earth that has back pain, you're kind of, it's going to be diluted and you're not going to speak to anybody. But if you choose your local area, or you choose women over 60 with back pain, then you're going to be able to have a bigger impact on helping people in that area. So the same is, a similar thing is true, I think, for social justice, that if you choose a local issue, you as one person may be able to make a huge difference, or you can choose to be part of a bigger movement working on a broader problem than that. So that's one piece of what I would say. And then, um, so it's a part of it is figuring out what are the things that you most want to impact, because nobody can do everything, and to try, well, is just a recipe for burnout. Um, so that's part of what I help people do, is figure out what is the part that they want to do, and how can they be most effective on that issue.
Hmm. Cool. It's interesting because you didn't say these words, but the words that ring in my ear that somebody said to me recently was, when you go from being an ally to an advocate, right? I mean, you can
Mm-hmm.
be supportive and sit back and say, yeah, we need to make that change and be an ally, or you can start to advocate for the things that you want to see different and the things that are happening that are wrong. And like you said, it doesn't mean I have to go stand in a picket line or have a sign or any of that. There are a lot of ways to make that difference. And for some people, it's simply by, writing a check. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. And one of the ways to do that as a business owner is to pledge a certain amount of your income or a certain amount of your profits to to a cause that you believe in, to an organization that you believe in. And to say that, I think it's important for me to say, when I was first starting out in my digital marketing business, I was given the advice never to talk about sports, religion, or politics in my
Right.
business because it would chase people away. And I was cool with not talking about sports, and I was cool with not talking about religion, but I was not cool with not talking about politics, because my feeling is anybody who would not hire me because they don't like it that I think everybody should be treated with dignity and people should be put before profits and we got to protect the earth and ending discrimination. Anybody would not hire me because I believe those things, I don't want as a client or customer.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with chasing people away like that. And I've turned down clients because they came to me for a project that I didn't believe in. Like there was a pro tobacco company. There was somebody who wanted my help starting um, a clinic, one of those clinics that pretends to be a women's health clinic but is an anti-abortion crusader kind
Mm.
of organization, and I've turned those down. So I think I lost track of something else I was going to say. Will you remind me what your question was? Do you remember?
If you remember, I've already moved on. I was talking about the difference between an ally and an advocate, and that sometimes it's okay to to write the check.
Yes, yes. And so that reminds me of the other thing that I wanted to say. I totally agree with you that it's okay to just write the check. When I talked about the interview series that I do and why I'm really trying to demystify what it looks like to do social justice work, anybody who is a business owner, I promise you, has skills that can be from that can be really useful in working for social change. A lot of the work that I do as an activist, I use the same sets that I use in my business. So a lot of it is about being able to communicate. It helps to know how to use online technology. It helps to have skills at listening to what people need and knowing how to address their needs, knowing how to get things done, knowing how to take a bunch of different aspects of a project that need to happen and get them all to work together. Those are all things that we've learned as business owners, and they're absolutely essential skill sets. Or there are people who work for social justice who don't have those skill sets, but those skill sets are really needed.
I love that. I hadn't really thought about it, but it makes sense. As a business person, you do have skills that, I mean, look, the bottom line is social justice and fighting for these causes it's a business, whether it's a moneymaker or a nonprofit, it's still a business that requires all the same things that your for-profit business, needs and requires as well. So that's a great point. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. Good, good. Other ways that you think business owners, or specifically, our community, um, can jump in and make those differences that maybe are a little different than anybody else.
So one of the things that I see going on is that, fortunately, there's an increasing number of businesses and organizations and individuals that really want to make a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and don't really know how to gain an understanding of what marginalized communities need. And so, and I guess it depends on sort of where you're listening, but where I'm listening online and in my life in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a value to, um, there's a kind of, I don't know exactly what to call it. There's a message that it's not okay to ask members of marginalized communities to spend their time and their emotional effort and their work without being paid to educate people who are trying to learn about their the marginalized people who are outside that marginalized community, trying to learn about what's going on inside, and that people are really encouraged instead to at least begin with reading and watching and gathering resources that people have already taken the time to create. So I think making sure that there are resources that people can find that represent the way that you, as a member of, you, Diane, or you, anyone who's listening to this, who's a member of the queer community, if it, making sure that you know where resources are to refer people to, and that if you're not finding the things that you want people to really understand, creating those so that you can be heard without having it take a ton of your time. And every time somebody says, like, can I pick your brain about what the queer community or what the trans community thinks about this, you can send them a link. And so that's one thing, is like, just make sure that the resources that are out there represent you the way you want to be represented.
And I love this idea of, whether you get paid for it or not. I'm a capitalist at heart, so I love having things. But there's nothing wrong with creating things that is good information, and having a small fee, or creating some sort of revenue stream behind that, just because there's nothing else available, or you can't find the thing that you think represents your particular thing. I mean, I love that idea.
I think there's also room for people to be available to be paid consultants in that area. If a company wants to do better in diversity, equity, and inclusion around queer issues, let them hire you to teach them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a good friend here in Atlanta who does just that with her company. So good. So Emily, let's talk about, let's shift gears here for a minute, right? And I love staying inside of sort of this whole social justice and thing that you're doing, but talk a little bit about maybe some of the best business advice that you've gotten in your career.
Let's see, I told you kind of a piece that I rejected, right? And I do want to make sure that we get to talk about the election protection thing before we finish too, but sure. I'm happy to answer your question. So for people who are just starting out and trying to figure out, so I'm thinking most of the businesses that I've worked with have been like coaches and consultants and service-based businesses. Is that who your audience tends to be?
It's a wide gamut. So I've got folks that are, online, people that have, brick and mortar businesses. But, to me, business is business from the perspective of, the principles and strategies and those kinds of things tend to be very similar.
Okay. So for people who are just starting out, what I was going to say, which may not only be relevant to that group that I mentioned, is if you're trying to figure out who your ideal customers are, that it really helps to choose a group of ideal customers to focus your business on who are already gathering somewhere on or offline that you can find. Because it's really hard. Like I had somebody yesterday, a client, ask me, wanting to start a support group for people with social anxiety, that's a group that probably would be pretty tricky to find to market to, because people are not, even their friends don't necessarily know that they are dealing with that, right? So it doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's going to be much trickier than if you find somebody, if you choose something where the market can easily be found.
That's great advice. I often say to people, when you start to think about your market, and one of the things that I have is a target market checklist that works toward this. But when I talk about this, I often say to people, can we go buy a list, right? In other words, can I go to a list broker and say, this is what I want? Can the list be specific enough that we can find them, right? Is there a magazine? Is there a newspaper? Is there a organization, an association that you can find that is dealing with that? And if you can, then the answer to your question of whether this is a good market or not is probably yes. Obviously, I can sort of general rule is 30,000 and up. My general rule is somewhere between 30,000 and 300,000, because there is such a thing as having too big of a market.
Mm-hmm.
But
I like that.
Knowing that you can find them is a critical piece, right? I often say to people, if you said to me, I want to find a, one-legged, a midget who lives in Buckhead, Atlanta, that owns a one-legged purple parakeet. I don't know if that exists, but it's specific enough that I could go find out if that list exists. You know what I mean? So the specificity piece is definitely something that's critical. So let's talk about the election stuff, because certainly we're moving into an election, and there's a lot of talk certainly in the United States and the world right now about the election and all of the candidates and that whole thing. And so certainly who is in the 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 president of the United States certainly has much more than I ever thought possible in the last 4 years, has certainly affected our lives as a community.
Absolutely.
A lot. And so probably more so than I remember in my lifetime. So
And not only the president, but also who's in who's who the judges are, which are appointed by the government, by elected officials in many cases, or are elected themselves. Those are the two ways people become judges, as far as I know. And people in state legislatures and governors are all impacting our lives in really big
yeah.
ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So talk a little bit about what you're doing in that regards, and sort of some of the things that we need to be aware of.
Okay, so I've been involved in election security since the aftermath of the 2004 election, and really came to understand the dangers of the move that the country made after the 2000 election and the fiasco in Florida to votes that are counted by computers. And I'm sure that your audience is savvy enough to know that computers are not entirely secure. I mean, if you look at the giant security breaches that have happened with huge companies, including security related companies, and our election system computers are much less secure than those companies' systems are. So there's virtually all the votes in the country are now counted. Even votes cast on paper are now counted by computers that are hackable and riggable, and the counts can be manipulated by software. So that's been terrifying to me. It's something I've been working on for a long time. And my colleagues and I in the field of election security have developed a number of ways that individuals can take action that will help protect the elections. At the same time that we've been doing this work, there is an unfortunately separate and much bigger movement for voting rights in general, and to stop voter suppression and including voter intimidation tactics, throwing people off the voting rolls, etc. And these two movements have been working very separately from each other, but obviously need each other. One is made up of people who know how to get large numbers of folks motivated and mobilized to take action, and the other tends to be made up of security professionals and techies who are not as familiar with how to mobilize people, but they can figure out the sort of what we need to do to check on put a check on these computerized systems. So I saw the need of bringing these two movements together and mobilizing the country to get out and take the actions that will help catch election fraud, which is, I want to say, different from voter fraud. Voter fraud is the fake thing that we hear about, that Fox News is always talking about dead people voting, and it's basically a non-issue. It almost never happens. Election fraud is something that does happen. So there are specific actions that individuals can take, and I'll give you one example, that can help catch election fraud if it's happening. And because of that, if we can show that we're going to catch them this time, it can also help deter election fraud, because people are much likely to do it if they're going to get caught. And up until now, they've been able to do it with impunity because nobody's catching them. Now, I want to say, in the news, we hear a lot about foreign election interference. And that is not my specialty, but I can tell you that even without foreign election interference, our elections are in serious danger from the lack of security protocols in place in this country. And Diane, your state is among the worst in terms of election security. So an example of one of the things we can do that is something everybody can do is take photographs of the poll tapes that are posted outside every precinct. In most states, it's required to do this at the end when the polls close on election night. So the poll tapes are the total votes that were cast in that precinct, in that specific precinct. And taking photos of those and then comparing them with the official election results from that precinct the numbers should be absolutely the same. And if they're not, it's an indication that there was a change in the votes from what people cast to what got counted. And I'm connected with a project that's actually going to be putting out, they have an app that is going to be ready for the elections that will that people can upload those photos to and report if there are discrepancies. So that's a really easy thing that everybody can do. It actually only takes one person per precinct in the entire country, and actually less than that, because you could drive around to several of them in an evening and take photographs. And it's a little thing that could actually make a really huge difference. And it's only one of the things that people can do.
Right.
So I am in the process of launching an online community to train and connect people to do these election protection activities next year. It's called Scrutineers. So let me spell that for you. SCRUTINEERS. Scrutineers.org. And you can find us and get educated and find out how you can take action. It's a very action-oriented community. Like I said, it's brand new. You haven't heard of it yet because it's in the process of launching, and we're bringing in groups from all over the country who care about fair elections to work together to do what we can to protect next year's elections. It's a nonpartisan organization. So whether you're a member of any political party or none, you're welcome.
Good. So we've talked about a lot of different things, right? And interestingly enough, even the election is really another area of social justice, right?
Absolutely.
Within that. So any last words or anything, that you really want people to take away or to know or to do after this discussion?
What I really want people to know is that you can have an impact on what happens in the world in small or large ways, that it's not about what can one person do, because there are already millions of people doing stuff. So jump into the river and swim with us is really what I want to say. And it can be lonely in some of this work. In the election security work, sometimes I feel like I'm about the only queer person there, so I could use some company in that regard. And I just want to thank you for supporting the queer community in all the ways that you do, Diane.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, interesting. So are you getting any pushback, or do you feel like, you said you feel like sometimes you're the only queer person doing the work. Are you getting any pushback, or have you had any problems?
Around being queer?
Yeah.
Just that kind of clumsy stuff that people do when they want, when they have the intention of being an ally but don't really get it.
Right. Don't really know what to do yet.
Yeah.
Good. Good. So, Emily, this has been amazing. This is some great information, and certainly a different angle and things, but it's important stuff inside of our community and inside of the world. So I love that we're having a different kind of conversation about this. So why don't you give us your contact information, how folks can find out a little bit more about what you're doing and potentially even get involved with you?
Sure. So my general social justice consulting and online program can be found at powertomakeadifference.com. And I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/powertomakeadifference. I think the word "the" might be in the link, but I don't think it is. And then the election protection work can be found at scrutineers.org. Can you put those in the show notes or show
Yes,
description?
absolutely.
I'm not sure how to spell them.
Well, we absolutely will. So, Emily, I just want to say thank you again. Again, guys, just remember at Queer Profits Podcast, feel free to share this. I think this is such great information that, the more people you share this with or bring on and let them know that this is kind of a forum for all sorts of things that we're doing that include inclusion, community, as well as growth. We're talking about business things as well as other things. Certainly, everything that happens in the world affects not only our lives, but our businesses. So, I try to bring different topics and different ideas and different things that to be inclusive inside of our community. Love your comments. Would love to know more about what you guys want to hear. Until next time, I'm Diane Conklin with Queer Profits Podcast. Thanks for listening.